Hey, what is up guys? Kalem or KalemsFishtanks. Long time no see. It's been quite a while since I last uploaded a video. Last semester was pretty killer, but this semester is pretty light work. So I'm gonna be uploading a lot more often, probably about once a week. I've got a ton of new videos planned, but without further ado, let's hop into this Fishrooms tour. I've got about 5 planted tanks on the go right now, and I'm gonna be showing you guys every single one of them. So let's get started. So we may as well start with the one right beside me. This was the last tank I showed you guys, and this is my ADA 45P. It's about 9.5 US gallons, and right now it's doing super good. I'm super happy with it, but I've had a lot of problems with this tank. It started off with a bunch of brown algae, which is something that happens with new tanks, so I wasn't too worried about it, but then that evolved into a huge hair algae problem. I tried to keep manually removing as much as I could, but I couldn't get rid of this stuff. You can see there's a little bit left, and basically what I found out was I wasn't dosing enough fertilizers, so I just doubled the amount I was dosing, and then after a while most of it cleared up. Like I mentioned, there still is a little bit, but that's in the places where I was dosing with Flourish Excel. I would use Flourish Excel, it would kill off the hair algae, but the problem is it also killed the plants in those areas. So the hair algae would then come back and feed off the plants, and it's still kind of there, but with a little bit of patience, I'm hoping that stuff will go away shortly. On this tank, I'm using the Chihiros Vivid Mini. This was a new light at the time I got it. It's a little, still pretty new, but I wanted to test this stuff and use a lot of difficult plants. So I've used things like Rotella macrandra mini butterfly, Ludwigia senegalensis, and I wanted to see how powerful this light was, and so far I'm super happy with the results I've gotten. All my plants are extremely red and very healthy, and the tank itself is looking really good. As for fish in here, there is a couple of inhabitants, although I rarely see them. There's some pygmy corydoras, some dwarf emerald rasboras, as well as some amano shrimp that I see the most frequently out of everyone in there. They're pretty shy, but they are pretty new to this tank, so maybe in a couple months I'll see a bit more of them. As for fertilizer on all my tanks, I use root tabs. This tank I just recently added the first batch of them, and hopefully that'll help with growth a little. And then I also use liquid fertilizers as well. For this tank, I'm testing out ATP Complete. This is a fertilizer made by Dennis Wong, and I'm really liking this stuff so far. I probably need to dose it a little bit more to get the results I'm wanting. But yeah, that's what I'm testing out on this tank, and so far so good. I enjoy it. One of my goals with this tank was to have some Monte Carlo growing out of the water and draping down into it. And so far that's going okay. It's finally starting to establish itself, and I did a little bit of a trim recently. I kind of want to get it running down this little crack all the way down the wood, but that's going to take a lot of patience because this stuff doesn't grow the fastest. But eventually I think this tank will look amazing if it does end up doing that, but we'll have to see. On to the next tank. This one is my newest tank, and it is pretty small. This is a UNS 5S. It's only about 2.5 gallons, and so far it's been pretty troublesome. There's been a lot of algae and a lot of stink coming from it, and I guess that's because of the fungus on the wood. But yeah, so far not going too hot, but hopefully it will kind of establish itself after a little bit. So on this tank, I'm using the Chihiros WRGB A series. It is a bit of a budget light, but it works really good for what I'm doing here. I have it going across the whole rack. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm growing plants up here as well as this little tank. On this tank and the 9.5 that I showed you guys a second ago, I'm running ZoomEd canister filters. And now these things I really like. They're really cheap and they work pretty good. They're super easy to clean, way easier than something like Eheim, which I use on all my other tanks. So I really recommend you guys check these out. I really like them. This is also my only tank without any CO2, so it's my only low-tech tank. All the other tanks, as well as the one you saw earlier, are all gonna have CO2, but this is my only low-tech one. So far, things are going pretty well in here, apart from all the algae, in terms of plant growth. The Monte Carlo is seeming to carpet really well, which is super exciting because I was worried that stuff wouldn't do too well without CO2, but when it gets a lot of light, it does seem like a pretty easy plant. So the next tank we're gonna look at is my 20-gallon long. It is one of my favorite tanks and one of my most natural, but it's also one of the hardest to get shots of. It's in a really weird position in my room, so it's not easy getting good camera shots. But in this tank, I have a bunch of different breeding projects going on, or not a bunch, I've got like 2. I'm breeding least killifish, which are a super interesting fish. I think they're native to North America. I don't remember exactly. And then I'm also kind of creating my own little strain of Endler's live bears. They were like a cross between, what were they called? I think chili Endlers and some weird yellow ones, or some snakeskin, but I think they were initially from Yellow Jacket Tiger Endler line. But I'm getting some pretty cool babies in there. I don't exactly know the strains, but I'm just kind of throwing stuff together in there. I've been kind of letting it get taken over by moss. There's a bunch of easy plants in here, and I'm running CO2, so everything goes pretty crazy, which is awesome. It's a lot of fun in that tank. It's not really high maintenance. Every once in a while I'll have to trim the hygrophila at the back, but that's pretty much about it. Scrape the glass. It's super simple, not too much for this tank to do, and that's why it's one of my favorites. So now we're gonna go move downstairs and we're gonna go check out the 24-gallon as well as the 40 breeder as well. So now we're in front of my 24-gallon, and this is probably one of my more crazy scapes. A lot of energy on this one. I'm using the Chihiros Vivid 2. This light is absolutely amazing. Super happy with it so far, and it gets really good colors out of the plants. This tank was meant to be a Dutch tank, still kind of is, but it's became more so like a collection tank where I just throw in all my crazy plant species that I have nowhere else to keep. There's a ton of different rare Bucephalandra in here, as well as a bunch of different kinds of Rotalas and different difficult to grow plants. I keep stocking on this tank super light. There's maybe about 10 Ember Tetras and then a bunch of cherry shrimp and 2 Autosynclus in this tank, and it's about 24 gallons like I mentioned. So the stocking is super light, and I don't dose any nitrates at all. I'm currently using this Advitin stuff. It's a new Canadian brand out in Scarborough, and I'm really liking it so far. It's working well for what I'm doing. There's no nitrates in it, so it doesn't stunt the growth of my plants that don't like nitrates. There's a lot of Rotalas that don't and will stunt if you dose too much of them. So things are going well in this tank. Maintenance on this tank is, you know, okay. There's a lot of trimming of plants, which can be a pain sometimes, but it's not really something you can complain about if your plants are growing too well. I don't really have to scrape the glass often on this tank, maybe every 2 to 3 weeks, and then I just do a 50% water change every week and add a little bit of fertilizer. It's a relatively simple task. So the last tank we need to talk about is the 40 breeder. This tank has been set up the longest of all the scapes you've seen today, and it's showing the signs of it. It's very old, the soil is, you know, filled with gunk, super nasty. So things aren't growing as good as they used to, except for the Bucephalandra in that tank. That plant is still going absolutely nuts. It's everywhere, and this is basically a Bucephalandra holding tank. My cat just knocked over my chair. Okay, clean that mess up. But anyways, it's basically just a Bucephalandra holding tank. I've got a lot of Buse, and I don't want to throw it out, so I'm just leaving the tank up to hold all that stuff, and then hopefully I can find a way to rehome all of it. There is an absolute ton. Eventually I will, hopefully. And then the plan for that is to rescape that tank and do something kind of similar to this one. I want to do another Dutch scape, but on a bigger scale, and do more of a Dutch scape rather than a plant collection tank, kind of like this one turned out. But that's going to be a while in the future. So that kind of wraps up all my tanks. I've only got 5 at the moment. There's one that's dry starting, or dark starting, that I'll show you guys eventually. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up all I wanted to say. I just wanted to let you guys know one more time that I'm gonna try to upload every single week. Hold me to it, you know, message me on Instagram, all that stuff, harass me. I'll get to it, and hopefully I'll be able to bring you guys some good content. But anyways guys, this was KalemsFishtanks. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.